start thinking earlier what type of data is going to be helpful for operations, maintenance, managing our assets, all of those types of things. I want you to kind of open your mind a little bit past the visualization that we're creating and start to think about the data inputs that we could overlay to that visualization. But I want to just kind of think a little bit about, peel away the onion about other types of data. Unstructured data, reports, paper. Paper is evil. Okay, good morning. So these are all the people that behaved last night and got up early morning to see me. Thanks for doing that. I always hate it when they do that in the first day of the conference, as they send a nice little party like that and you're suffering in the morning. So anyways, my name's Kelly Watt. I'm a consultant for a small firm called Digital Twin Consulting. I've been working on some large critical infrastructure projects. I've been with DFW pretty much embedded for the last 2.5 years. So I was thinking about this presentation today and what I would share with you. And you're going to get a lot of really cool reality capture from other presentations. You're going to get a lot of really cool new workflows. So I'm going to go a little bit out of the norm for an event like this and talk a little bit about other types of data that we can bring into this mystery thing we call a digital twin. And how do we get to events and actions from what we're creating? So that's going to be a bit of the theme today. You can connect to me through the QR code. I'm always on LinkedIn. It's probably easier to reach me on LinkedIn than email these days. But yeah. So I'm going to start with a very loose definition of digital twin, and I'm going to hone in around this term synchronization. Because this one makes people really uncomfortable, especially in the building information modeling world and in the reality capture world. How can we have synchronous data when we're talking about imagery and point clouds? It's a little bit kind of out there. What we need to understand with the type of data sources that we're bringing into a twin is that we want to bring in at the fidelity that makes sense. So when you're on a construction site taking construction photography, it might be daily or weekly to capture the change, right? What's relevant for that site. There's other types of information, though, that is real time on a construction site. You have equipment moving around, you have camera systems, you have drone in the box, you have all these different things that are happening. Even the workers that are on the site. Sometimes we're tracking people and how they move through a site. So I want you to kind of open your mind a little bit past the visualization that we're creating and start to think about the data inputs that we could overlay to that visualization to create some really unique and powerful and valuable use cases, whether it be safety, security, whether it be progress tracking or other. A lot of times in this world, we get really stuck on how we capture data, what technology we use, what resolution, what quality, what accuracy. Or in the building model world, is how are we attributing? Are we using COBE? What are the standards? Are we building that common data environment? All those things are still important, no question. But I want to just kind of think a little bit about, peel away the onion about other types of data. Unstructured data, reports, paper. Paper is evil to what we're trying to do in these digital transformation projects. So if there's a paper or manual process, how do we streamline it? How do we document it digitally? How do we bring that into a spatial context so that we can get information quickly? If I'm walking into a space and I can point to something and extract information visually, it's far easier than going into the folders and the reports and the difficulty it is to extract information. And likewise, start to think about what data needs to be handed over, not just because of a requirement, that it's just something that we dump on facilities, but start thinking earlier what type of data is going to be helpful for operations, maintenance, managing our assets, all of those types of things we start thinking about. So I really like this model as how we start to think about the levels of maturity, and maturity gets a bit of a boring discussion, but I think this really categorizes things really nicely. And in the construction side, a lot of times we're in the descriptive diagnostics, might have some real-time data. For the most part, it's mostly static data. Real-time might be your schedule, it might be other elements that are important to the project. When we get into operations, we get into telemetry, sensors, and things that get a little bit more complicated. It's really just even a different group of people that are really working in that world. So where we have our common data environment that's static straight across, we also have this thing called a system of systems thinking. How do we have systems talk to each other? How do we build this interaction, build towards automation? These are things we've got to start to think through. And just as it is in the building information model world, if your IoT data is not structured in a way, it really is difficult to do that. So we've got to start thinking about that, because if we're going to bring that kind of data into a world and we're going to relate IoT to static assets, how do we do that effectively, efficiently? So those are the things to start thinking about. So from data sources, I've just kind of listed off some of the key data sources we think about in a digital twin project. So you have your spatial data. We all know about spatial data. That could be milestone captures. It could be imagery from your construction that we start to bring in so that we could peel apart walls and roofs and have that available for operations. It may be obviously your building information model, but more than that. Like maybe we're converting the model into a gaming engine because we want a dynamic model. So what is our end output that we're going to want? It really depends on the use case. It depends on talking to the stakeholders and understanding what is their end result that they're trying to achieve for this. And then what's the best method to deliver that data? What's the interface that we're going to start using? And then, again, another layer that's really starting to become really important to us to talk about is the intelligence layer. So we're all talking about generative AI, machine learning, all of this type of automated ways to, retrieve data, to create data, and to have, some reasoning and understanding with that data. And especially in construction projects, you have, thousands of documents. You have AI can now look at a drawing and extract information. AI can go through all of these documents and pull out relevant information based on a prompt. So thinking about how we store this data and then using tools to be able to extract that moving forward. So we are doing at the airport, we have Copilot embedded into our digital twin. We've done some initial uploads of operator manuals, our chillers, air handlers, passenger boarding bridges, but now we're going deeper. We have daily inspections on our passenger boarding bridges, really relevant information. We know exactly the current state of that visual inspection that now can migrate into the twin. But it wouldn't happen if I had a paper process, if I had a checklist that I'm doing. So that requires a mobile device, it requires connectivity, it requires a digital form, it requires that information to feed into a database, and it requires that data to then feed into some kind of knowledge space that we can query, right? So we got to think about data architecture here, not just creating the shell or the container. We got to think about the data that we're going to feed into that twin and how that's going to be organized in a way that we can retrieve it, that we can query it, that we can ask for answers, and we can get answers quickly. So what kinds of real-time data am I talking about? So, some of the business problems we're worried about are traffic movement. So, how does that relate to a BIM model or reality capture? Well, we need to understand physically where things are located. So that spatial context is still really relevant and really important. We have to go out, though, in a lot of these digital twin projects. I learned that, coming into the airport, it's like, well, you don't have sensors, but it's not my job to install sensors. I'm going to put the spatial together, and you guys are just going to give everything to me. No, not always like that. So when we start to think about the use case, the sensing capability, what is going to be required to deliver the use case value? So we are installing various camera systems, and actually fixed LiDAR is a really important part. We invested a $25 million 5-year project where we're going to install LiDAR sensors to do tracking of everything from vehicles to objects to people, counting to behavioral things, security, all sorts of things. But that's generating this really interesting data that we can use for different purposes. But we need to then have that data transport in a common format and go to a common place that we can understand it. So other information that comes in the airport is flight data. That's kind of a unique data set. So we have, by the second flight schedule changes, flight positions, all this flight data, make the model of the aircraft. Is it going to fit this gate or that gate? Does that gate have the right equipment to service that plane? So it's really, really complex. And if your flight controllers don't have enough information, they can make the wrong decisions, and that can cause you time. And in the airport world, seconds matter. and minutes are millions of dollars. So one of our big projects is to monitor our passenger boarding bridges. The bridges themselves come with some sensing capabilities on their GPU, PCA, but we want to do condition-based monitoring. So that means vibration and acoustics, it means hydraulic monitoring, wheel bogies. So all of those elements are important because if that asset is not going to be operational, I need to know in advance. I need to take it down prior to some type of busy day and make sure it's fixed and ready for operation. So that type of capability is important. But again, that actually comes back to design. It comes back to the original construction project. Do we have the right equipment on the gate to meet the use case? It makes sure that we're programming the data, we're lifting the data in the way that we're wanting to so we can get access to it. We're going to talk a little bit about MQTT a bit. And that data can then be brought forward into the business systems we want it to be brought forward into. So we're going to talk a little bit about open architecture and data transfer there. Not that exciting, but I get pretty excited about it because of the problems it solves. They're huge. Another one is baggage, right? We have dozens of people behind the scenes sitting there waiting to move a bag because it's jammed. We have issues that happen every day where something will fail. It's a big problem. It's every airport deals with baggage, and if things slow down or stop, it's just a multiplier effect. So, first thing, we need to have a documentation. We need to make sure our maintenance are done. So connecting our CMMS platform so that we can make sure that maintenance is done accurately. Sensing capabilities brought in so we can run continuous monitoring. And that we can look at not just a single asset and how it's performing, but how the system itself is performing. Because one thing may affect another, and one thing may be a cause of a root of something else going wrong. So looking at your architecture of how you connect assets and systems, whether it be through some kind of hierarchy, or where a lot of people are going now is to ontology. So if you ever go into Google and you're searching things, it's really smart at finding information because it has relationships between things. And that's what an ontology is. It's being able to relate things in a different way. So when you're starting to think of these projects early on, ontologies are going to start to come up more and more because it's a very valuable way to relate data. And if those things are established a little earlier on, it makes it easier to implement at a later stage. So a couple other things that we can talk about: elevators, escalators, moving walkways. Those are other projects we have going on right now for sensorization and continuous monitoring, but also entrapments. I don't think they want to tell you guys how many entrapments we have per day. It's a lot more than we'd want to. You imagine you're going to your flight and you get stuck in an elevator. Not a good feeling. So again, these types of things we want to prevent. And if we're going to prevent them, we have to monitor them. We need to know the current state. We need to know their histories. So these are all the things that you start to think about beyond the construction project. And all that information that comes over from construction does become valuable, but also thinking forward to see, well, what is our end state with this design, and do we want to have further investments done up front? Because it's way cheaper to do it during construction than ripping out walls and changing out switches and doing cables after the project. So I'm going to introduce a concept to you guys, and I would strongly suggest you Google, or you go on LinkedIn and you find this gentleman, and his name is Walker Reynolds. Walker Reynolds is an evangelist for a concept called unified namespace. It's extremely disruptive in the manufacturing and in the IoT space. It's changed my thinking in a lot of contexts. It's helped me with our data strategy significantly. He's very similar to Matt is in the reality capture world for the manufacturing world to deal with IoT data. And he has a free online university he has on his website, but the construct is not difficult. It's a structure of how we name things, and it gives a spatial location in the IoT world. Because in the IoT world, you call a sensor, it's Modbus 1, Modbus 2, Modbus 3, Modbus 4, and it's connected to a PLC. Well, you start adding thousands and thousands of those, like good luck trying to find things, right? And that makes it hard when you're trying to relate something like that to an asset that's in your BIM model. So what they've done is they've created a structure, or it's not software, it's nothing. It's just a way of thinking, and a way of thinking how we structure data, how we organize them, how we name things, and then building a node-based way of communicating data. So what that means is, today a lot of times vendors will have a software and you're connected to that software and there's an API out of the software, works beautiful. And you have lots of those softwares, so you start getting all these software stacked up and all these different connections in, all these connections out. Now I want this to talk to this, and it becomes an absolute nightmare to try to integrate all these things. So when you start to rethink and re-engineer that and say, well, wait a second. The first thing I don't want to do is I don't want to rip out hardware because I want to change a vendor. So I need to be involved here, right? So what we've done is, sorry, let's back up here a second. So I want to be able to communicate the data from an end device, a PLC, to where we want the data to flow into business systems, any business system. So we are embedding a node, and we're building our unified namespace in MQTT. MQTT is a communication protocol. It's open source. The oil and gas industry created it. And there are tools that help you communicate data in real time through MQTT. If you know integrations, it's a JSON format, basically, and it's just carrying the information. Doesn't store it, just carries it forward from point A to point B. But when we standardize the data and we carry it forward, we can point it to where we like. And the nice thing about MQTT is you can have multiple subscribers or multiple consumers. So I have a topic, is what I create for all my IoT data, and now I don't have to ask someone to integrate. I just say, here, just authenticate, take the data, you can have it. So we've done this with all of our building automation controls, so about 130,000 endpoints that are live streaming real time, contextualized data with a schema that tells me exactly where it is. I know when I look at the point where it is in the building, what it belongs to, what system, and exactly what end device it is. And then that goes into our digital twin and connects to our building information model and to our rules engine for predictive analytics. So that's been a ground change. It took us about 9 or 10 months to figure this out. Seems like very simple when you share knowledge, and that's what Matt was talking a little bit about. We have to share what we learn, and this is probably my biggest finding here at with this project is be able to handle that data that way. So now, too, it also makes you agile. I can test things even while I have a vendor in place. It's not that I want to, change, but I want to have the ability to change, and I want to adapt new technology when I can. So, we have a small project with Autodesk Tandem because I want to see how their platform's doing. I want to see what's new. How's that going to interact? I have multiple fault detection tools, and I want to experience those and see what they're like. I give them authentication. We do a little POC. We can learn really quickly. So having open architecture is really important because it gives you the flexibility to adapt and change. So the things that we talked about, just wrap up this section a little bit. We talked about ontologies and relationships and semantic understandings between assets and why that's important. We talked a little bit about the visualization interfaces and how data feeds into those. And again, I don't really call the digital twin the BIM model or the GIS platform or the reality capture as much as it is the data that we're bringing together, right? It's how we bring that data together, and then we can go into that data node and say, listen, I want this data for this use case, and I want it to look like this, either on a dashboard or in an IOC on a huge screen. It's how that consumer wants to consume that data. And you're probably going to have different ways to consume that. So let's talk a little bit about reality capture. We're at a reality capture conference, and I spent half my time talking about things totally different. So what are the tools that we're using? And what's the appropriate tool for the use case? So we use a variety of tools. There's 4 opportunities at DFW to sell equipment. If you're a vendor and want to sell equipment, we have our DPS that has some aging Faro equipment that's looking for new equipment. We have our GIS team that is just starting to want to buy equipment, entry-level SLAM devices. We've looked at BLK, we looked at the new Naviscanner. We're going to acquire something for them to do some basic facility mapping. We have our survey team, which have quite a bit of equipment, survey equipment, laser scan equipment, and we have our control analytics team that has a variety of everything. We have Navis, Leica, we have 6 Matterport cameras. So it depends on what you're doing, right? I've been a big evangelist, if you know me for a while, on 360 imagery. I used to work at Faro, so I come from a LiDAR background, ran their global division for 5 years, and I was at Trimble before that. But I really saw the revolution with 360 video, 360 imagery, in terms of getting the right amount of information for a specific use case. So we've really gone crazy on Matterport. It's not because I'm a big evangelist for Matterport, it's because the customer used Matterport, we had cameras, and when you're in a position like I am, you don't get to choose the tools. You work with the toolbox you have and you try to make best with it. You identify gaps, you fix those gaps. Sometimes you bring in new solutions like we were talking about with MQTT, but for the most part, you got to do what they're doing. You got to work with what they have. So we've had a survey team. We hired 6, kind of fresh grads, young wet behind ears, never used a Matterport camera, trained them up, and they're doing our asset survey, some of the tag and trace work. They're doing all our asset collection, so all the documentation they're collecting from the existing facilities. We've got over 1,000 Matterport projects now. So it's a pretty impressive database of visualization, and it's helping all sorts of projects. ITS projects, we don't have to have vendors fly in on site. We are doing Matterport in construction as well, timelines, not for construction documentation, so the GCs are using other tools there. But we're building this inventory. Also, what we're doing with it is we're bringing it into change management. So now, when there's an asset changed out, or we're in a comm room and we're changing a bunch of servers and switchgear, we'll have the team that's on site that's trained to come out and recapture. And it's 20 minutes in a room. It's a very small lift. But we're not depending on our asset management team or the preventive maintenance. We're not depending on them. It's a separate team. So they appreciate what we're doing because we're creating information that's valuable for them. And we have a team that can do that job and do that lift. Take a picture, send me the documentation, we'll attribute it, we'll bring it in. What it also helps us do is it helps us to upload and change our BIM models, because we can get a grip on that management change. And managing a BIM program in operations is extremely tedious because there's so many different change elements happening all the time. How do you stay on top of it? Especially those projects are under 2 million and they're not part of a big capital project, construction project, where you have all these expected deliverables. All those little changes really start to decay the trust that you have in your information. So we'll talk about some of the things that we've been playing with. Walter Nix here came out to the airport. He's with Alan 3D, brought an Helios 3, and I've been wanting to play with one of these things for so long. Such a cool device. And we have a really tricky area under the airport. We have 2 miles of underground tunnel that is under our central utility plant. It has a lot of our fiber to the aircraft control towers, water systems, et cetera. And it runs basically along the International Parkway and then feeds to each of the terminals. There was a lot of desire to put some kind of spot robot down there and do some scans and look for leaks and look for issues, but we have ladders and it goes down under the roadway. It's like I'd have to have 7 spot dogs to do that. So we've been looking at different technologies, and having some kind of autonomous drone flight was something really high desire. The drone did the job. It captured the data. It did a very good job doing it quickly. I wouldn't model with this data necessarily, but we're getting visual. We'll be able to tag things to the model. We did have some survey control. You'll see the checkerboards in there from a different project because there's lots going on down there. We're going to be ripping out about 40% of what's in here. But what I didn't think about is the asbestos and all of the dust in some of these areas. And we actually shut down a tunnel for 2 or 3 days after we did the scanning. Not in this main tunnel, but one of the smaller tunnels. So we ruled it out as a technology that we could use in that physical environment just because of the environment. But we did also use that, and these are some of the deliverables. That's the vaults. We have 7 of those vaults, which are 3 stories. That's the purple. And then you also have some of the thermals. So it was really fascinating seeing some of the heat signatures on some of the equipment as well. Running through there just from a thermal inspection perspective would be really valuable. But yeah, I think we might have to do something a little different. So we had Navis come out. Nate scanned the same tunnel. I'm going to get my data later this week, so I'm pretty excited about that. I gave him a couple of weeks because he had like 18 demos that week, so I felt bad for the guy. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our baggage system. So the baggage system was scanned with the drone. Actually, that worked fabulously. So I probably would use the Helios to document the baggage systems. Again, not to build accurate models or as-built, but for baseline visualization and whatnot. And I was talking to Michael at AECOM, and I always get inspired by AECOM, always do some really wild and cool stuff. And they were talking about how they have basically a robot, and they have a way to put a camera and just run it through the system. And they're using QPix and actually creating an environment by just putting it on a conveyor and let it run through. I've done a lot of work with QPix in the past. I think it's a phenomenal platform. Not to undermine others, I've used a lot of platforms. That's just one I have a lot of experience doing, a lot of plant work, walk-in conveyors, doing millions of square feet in days. Actually, 2 years ago, Christmas Day, I was out in a Mueller plant. They basically shut the plants down for 5 days. That's it. So I went out, had someone fly in. I was 2.5 days on one plant, 2.5 days on the other plant, and I got 100% of the documentation, every square inch. So, and that's been used over the last 2 years for design, implementation, coordination, planning. So again, right tool for right fit. That tool is excellent for large-scale documentation. Matterport is going to be really good for high-resolution documentation. So our IT infrastructure, assets, getting those valve tags that are about this big and be able to read them. So that resolution becomes important when you want the detail. So why do these projects fail? Well, obviously they get really complicated out of the gate, and scope creep can really happen. Other things that happen, just not having the capabilities to integrate, not understanding the business systems that are older, are harder to connect to. Having IoT data that's sparse with all these protocols that hasn't been standardized, that can be an absolute nightmare. And then infrastructure. Last 2 years ago when I was back here, I talked about the failings of our first POC in Terminal D, that we picked a project that was probably the biggest problem area. We thought, oh, if we could solve that, we'd all be happy. Let's go after that. But really, we need a $70 million investment in the HVAC systems to really be able to solve that problem. So what happens, that project becomes a asset improvement. I'm buying controllers, I'm doing all these things in this project. The budget starts to balloon, the schedule starts to balloon, and then what happens is the confidence just starts doing a nosedive. So picking that first project is important, but thinking through the elements. It's not just about building the system, because if you build the system and nobody uses it, it's worth nothing. You have to think about adoption. You have to think about the people in the process. How are they going to use the tool? How do they want to use the tool? What are the interfaces that they use every day? Am I force feeding them something that they don't want to eat? So how do we work together? You got to workshop, you got to get on the ground. And then understanding some of those fundamental challenges that just totally destroy a program. So we're seeing a lot of paper in the airport. I'm like, well, why? We have a CMMS, it's digital. Well, they don't have connectivity in the field. So our 5G upgrades were really important. Well, that's a dependency to make this work in the field, right? We need to have mobile devices in their hand. They didn't have iPads. Got to get them iPads, right? What else do we got to think about? Well, one of our largest service providers on an HVAC are all Arabic, and they don't speak a lot of English. Nobody talked about this being a business challenge. It is a business challenge. Think about languages and translations, text to audio, having that availability for them to communicate effectively in the business tools that we're using. So those things we don't really think about, but what happens is the coordinator prints the work orders, hands out the paper, and the people take their paper, the grease and everything, they write their notes on it, send it back to the coordinator, and she gets a stack of this and she puts it over there and she does it on Friday. Well, how do we get to predictive? How do we get the outcomes we want? We're investing in these digital transformation projects. That one process can just totally destroy it. Likewise, people are unwilling to change, and there's always people that are unwilling to change. How do we get them on board? Well, sitting shoulder to shoulder with them in the field, understand what they do, and understanding their problems, say, well, if we could solve that problem, how would that impact your life? Oh, that'd be great. So like our Matterport program, I don't want to take pictures, I don't want to document, pain in the ass. But you don't have the information when you need it, so what's the fix? Well, we'll hire a team to do that. We need you to buy in to do this part, and they'll do that part. So there's a lot here, and that's why we layer a consulting process in this investment that we're doing. Digital twins right now, leaderships are running around, going to conferences, trying to bring back ideas, and they often will find something that's shiny and they really want it. And say, well, I want that and I want it done quickly, and we should be doing this. Everyone else is doing it. It's a race. We have to do it now, and I want the team. You have to be able to sit with them and say, okay, well, what is the outcome? What is it? Like, we're doing this for a business reason. We want to do it to save money. We want to do it to increase safety or security or reduce the costs on supplies or things failing or interruptions, all these types of business problems. Let's put these into a process. Let's evaluate them. Let's prioritize them. Let's understand the dependencies, the infrastructure, the IoT, the BIM model. All these things are costs that we have to consider. And we got to kind of constrain it into a reasonable project and work with an agile delivery so that we can implement, test, get feedback, and have this loop. So a couple of our deliverables as I sign off, building the use case dashboards, evaluating those, prioritizing them, understanding the cost of those dashboards, This is a process we went through, executive leaders, all the leaders, and I got about 6 pages of the stakeholders in the airport. These are all the different people that we interviewed and understand, well, what do they care about? What do they care about, and how does that relate to the projects that we're proposing? And what are the end outcomes? Are there environmental outcomes we're looking for, operational, cost savings, security, whatever? So going through that and documenting, well, I would like this to happen and it would impact my life this way. So going through that process to get that information gathered is really important so that we can make the right bets. And that's what this is. I mean, we are investing and we're betting that investment is going to get us a return. And we can't forget that. And if you're trying to get leaders to buy into reality capture, BIM modeling or anything, you have to start thinking about, well, what business problem does it solve? You can see the problems it solves in construction. If you think bigger of what other problems it can solve, and you can help to paint those use cases and you paint that future for them, it gives them a lot more buy-in to want to act. And the more that they can get help from a company like us, or maybe some of you guys start taking some of the thoughts here and start to implement those thoughts, then you're going to enable them to make those decisions. So we are interested in partnering with companies. There's a lot of people here doing projects that have access to potential large complex digital twin projects, and maybe you're trying to get some of that investment done on the BIM and the reality capture and you're struggling. Well, we're here to help, so happy to collaborate with anyone. And I'm just at my time here, but thank you very much. If any questions, feel free to come talk to me.